Wes, do you think what's happening at the moment with the Labour Party internal processes and Diane Abbott shows the Labour Party in the best light?
I'm not entirely sure what's happened, and when you mentioned Diane Abbott's tweet, hadn't seen it. I've just taken a look, and I think, to be honest, this is why so many of the questions I've had on the morning media round this morning are pretty futile, because we've seen claim and counterclaim. Diane Abbott herself, in her statement, seems to be referring to media reports that she's been barred. So it seems that I'm certainly not clear what's happened here.
So perhaps it's a good opportunity for the Labour Party and for its ministers, for its shadow ministers, to actually finally clarify what's happening, rather than hiding behind a so-called independent report, which, as we both know, or process, which, as we both know, ultimately it will come up to the leader's office to decide.
Well, firstly, it is right that Labour's disciplinary processes are independent.
Oh, come on, Wes. We all know they're not really independent. We all know ultimately. No, Wes. We all know that ultimately, in the end, it is up to the leader, and that is why there has been.
I think, with respect, Lewis, you're conflating two things. There's the disciplinary process, which is independent, and there's a question of whether Diane is a candidate at the general election, which is a political choice. And that they are separate things. So the disciplinary process she's been through is independent, and she's cleared that, and I'm glad of that. And I'm glad that both the process is complete, that Diane has apologised for what she said, and we can move on in that respect. In terms of her candidacy, I don't know what the situation is. I'm sure we're going to hear about that at some point today.
Yeah, just on that, and on the independent report, the independent process. People like me have been asking people like you, and indeed Keir Starmer himself, basically for a year, about the timing of that. I asked Keir Starmer about it in March. He told me that process was ongoing. My colleague Nick Ferrari asked Starmer about it on Friday. He said that process was ongoing. It now appears that process concluded in December. Was he misleading us?
I don't know that that's true, and I'm not going to rely on media hearsay.
Well, it would be good for the Labour Party to finally clarify it, wouldn't it, Wes? Because you talk about media hearsay. The reason there's media hearsay is because the Labour Party and people like you are refusing to clarify or saying anything about it, and coming onto studios or interviews like this saying, I don't know anything about it. It's your party. Maybe you should know something about it.
Well, I'm glad that among the many things I have to worry about, the Labour Party's disciplinary processes and candidate selection are not my responsibility.
An MP that's been serving since 1987, your first black female MP, it's just not of no interest to you or your colleagues?
No, actually, quite the opposite. And I just say on the second point, and I say this with enormous respect for Diane Abbott and everything that she has achieved, and the trail that she has blazed as Britain's first black woman MP. Despite our political disagreements, and we've had those plenty over the years, I do have enormous respect for Diane Abbott. I do have.
Your party's not treating her with much respect, though, is it, Wes? Your party's not treating her with much respect.
But in that spirit of respect, I would also say that there are 7.5 million people on NHS waiting lists. I can't do anything about Diane Abbott. I can do something about that if people vote Labour on July the 4th.
Do you understand why it is that many people look at the Labour Party internal processes and look at how Diane Abbott has been treated vis-a-vis some of your other colleagues and just see a completely bent process? They see that some people are allowed back into the party for saying things which are arguably worse, and that the process seems to be different. For example, Labour frontbencher Steve Reid, when he issued a tweet describing a Jewish Conservative donor as a puppet master, he didn't lose the whip. When Rupert Huck, the Ealing MP, described the then-Chancellor, Mr Kwasi Kwarteng, as superficially black, had the whip removed, then was put back, and it goes on and on. This stuff always just like there's one rule for one person and another for a different person.
That there are disciplinary processes that people are subjected to and go through. And then in a number of those cases, whether that's Diane Abbott's or Rupert Huck's or Neil Coyle's or other people who've lost the Labour whip, the whip has been restored. In some cases, the whip hasn't been restored. For example, when Jeremy Corbyn refused to recant what he said in the wake of the publication of the EHRC's damning report into anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, the whip was not restored. He will not be standing as a Labour candidate. In fact, he's been expelled from the Labour Party and is standing independently. So look, there are different circumstances in each case, but there are the same consistent processes and rules applied.
Well, they don't sound very consistent. If Diane Abbott had the whip restored and she's had a letter from the chief whip to that effect, on what basis might she be unilaterally banned from standing when the NEC hasn't met yet?
I've not been involved in the process.
Would you like to see her? Would you like to see her being allowed to stand? personally?
I'm
You've
sad.
talked about your
I'm sad.
respect.
I'm sad it's come to this, but as I say, I don't know what the factors are, what the process is, and I'm not here to be a commentator on a process that I've had no involvement in, and where the facts have yet to emerge.
But you must have a personal opinion.
My personal opinion is I'm really worried about 7.5 million people stuck on an NHS waiting list.
Well,
I'd
and
quite like
maybe
the
if your
chance to be
party had
able to do
handled it,
something about it if we win the next general election,
maybe
which ultimately comes down to the choice on July the 4th, where people can choose to go back to a Labour Party that's got a crowd record of the shortest waiting times, the highest patient satisfaction in the history of the NHS, or whether they're going to hand the matches back to the arsonists and risk waiting lists going as high as 10 million under the Conservatives if they get an unprecedented fifth term.
we'll be going to your calls in a moment with Wes Streeting. I would just say, Wes, that the truth is, and we all know this, I know this, you know it, it's pure factionalism. All this is about in the Labour Party is pure factionalism. If Diane Abbott were in Keir Starmer's faction, she'd be allowed to stand again. And we both know that.
There are plenty of people. I mean, I'll just point out, in the case of a Labour candidate in the northwest of England, who, when he was a Labour MP, was very much on Keir Starmer's wing of the Labour Party. His future remains in doubt. He was suspended because of comments that he made. As I say, the rules are applied fairly and consistently across the Labour Party. And frankly, I think people who are thinking about the next general election will be more worried about the state of our economy, the state of our public services, and 7.5 million people on the NHS waiting list than they will worry about any of us as individual politicians, and rightly so.
Well, I think that people might also think that Keir Starmer and your party say that you want to return public life to high standards and openness and transparency and integrity, and you can make a very strong argument that is not happening here. Anyway, we are going to go to a break, and then we are going to leave this and go to, forget my questions, go to your questions to the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. If you've got one, 0345 6060 973. Lewis Goodall here on LBC. The time is 10:18.